Jimmy Fallon had aloof accomplished his catechism aback Julia Roberts' eyes bound assimilate article in the audience. One additional later, she was on her feet. Two abnormal later, she was active, and no one could stop her. The flat froze. 400 bodies captivated their breath. The cameras didn't apperceive area to point. Jimmy Fallon, for the aboriginal time in his 20-year career, sat absolutely speechless, watching one of Hollywood's better stars dart bottomward the stairs adjoin row 3. What happened to Budding would become the best acclaimed moment in tonight's actualization history. But to accept why Julia Roberts ran, why Jimmy Fallon cried, and why an aged woman in the admirers afflicted aggregate that night, we charged to go back to the beginning. It was a Thursday black in October. The Tonight Show's flat at Rockefeller Center most hummed with its accepted pre-show energy. Admirers' associates filed into their seats, active with anticipation. Tonight's bedfellow was Julia Roberts, there to advance her latest film. Accepted appearance, accepted night. At Atomic, that's what anybody thought. But about in row 3 sat a woman who was about to face this accustomed Thursday into article extraordinary. And neither Jimmy Fallon nor Julia Roberts had any abstraction what was coming. Margaret Button was 78 years old. She had orate from Portland, Oregon to New York City for one reason, to see the Tonight actualization alive afore, as she agilely told her daughter. "My time runs out." Margaret had been diagnosed with date 4 pancreatic blight 3 months earlier. The doctors gave her 6 months. She gave herself one aftermost dream. Her babe Lisa had accounting to the actualization weeks ago requesting tickets. She never mentioned her mother's illness. She never asked for appropriate treatment. She artlessly capital her mother to acquaintance one night of joy, one night of laughter, one night of forgetting. Margaret had been a Julia Roberts fan aback 1990 aback pretty woman afflicted her life. She was activity through a aching annulment aback then activity invisible, activity worthless. And afresh she saw Julia Roberts ablaze up that awning with a smile that said, "You are enough. You matter. You can beam again." For 34 years, Margaret had agitated that message. Julia Roberts wasn't aloof and added to her. She was an attribute of survival. The actualization began at 5:15. Jimmy Fallon absolved out to clap applause, delivered his monologue, performed a account with the Roots. Aggregate ran like clockwork. Afresh came the moment anybody was cat and mouse for. Ladies and gentlemen, a music acceptable the one and abandoned Julia Roberts. The army erupted. Julia absolved out in an emerald blooming dress, beaming as ever, bouncing to the admirers with that acclaimed megawatt smile. She hugged Jimmy, sat down, and the account began. They talked about her new film. They talked about her kids. They laughed about an antic George Clooney had pulled on set. It was charming, funny, effortless. Classic Tonight Show. Subscribe and leave a animated version because the best able allotment of this chance is still ahead. About the 12-minute mark, article shifted. Jimmy asked Julia about her fan mail, about the belles lettres she receives from bodies about the world. Julia's announcement softened. "You know, Jimmy, I've been accomplishing this for over 30 years. And I still apprehend my letters, every distinct one. Because sometimes a stranger's words admonish you why you started." She paused. Her eyes drifted to join the audience, scanning the faces, the smiles, the eyes attractive aback at her, and afresh she saw her. Julia Roberts chock-full mid-sentence. Her smile faded. Her duke abashed boring to her chest. Jimmy noticed immediately. He leaned forward, confused, concerned. "Julia, you okay?" But Julia wasn't listening. Her eyes were bound on row 3. On a woman with white hair, on a woman who was errant silently, captivation a photograph adjoin her heart. A photograph of an adolescent woman continuing al fresco a Cine amphitheater in 1990. The covering reading, "Pretty woman," abaft her. Margaret Button had brought that photo, hoping, praying for a miracle. Acquisitive Julia ability, somehow see it how. "No." And Julia saw. "I'm sorry, Jimmy." Julia aside into the microphone. I charged to do something." Before anyone could react, Julia Roberts stood up from her chair. She didn't walk. She ran bottomward the stairs, accomplished the cameras, accomplished the abashed aggregation members, beeline into the audience. The flat gasped. Jimmy Fallon rose from his desk, borderline whether to chase or wait. The camera's accolade to clue Julia's path. The Roots chock-full playing. Complete blackout fell over Rockefeller Center. Julia accomplished row 3. She knelt bottomward in advance of Margaret Button, and she took the old woman's abashed easily in her own. "I see you," Julia said softly. I see you. Margaret couldn't speak. Tears streamed bottomward her face. 34 years of gratitude. 34 years of accustomed Julia's spirit through her darkest moments. All of it caked out in that distinct look. But what happened to Budding is what no one in the studio, and no one watching at home anytime saw coming. Julia looked at the photograph in Margaret's hands. She accustomed the angel instantly. She accustomed the achievement in that adolescent woman's eyes. And she accustomed article else. Article that fabricated her own tears activate to fall. This was you. Julia whispered. This was you, wasn't it? In 1990, Margaret nodded, still clumsy to anatomy words. You wrote me a letter. Julia affiliated years ago. You wrote me a letter adage that pretty woman adored your life, that you were activity to accord up, but you didn't because of that movie, because of Vivian. The admirers was asleep silent. Jimmy Fallon had stepped bottomward from the stage, continuing aloof a few anxiety away, watching. His eyes were wet. I kept that letter, Julia said, her articulation breaking. I kept it in my drawer for 30 years. I apprehend it every time I balloon why I do this. Every time I feel like I'm aloof pretending. Your letter reminded me that assuming can save someone's life. Margaret assuredly began her voice. It came out as a whisper, brittle and beautiful. You adored mine, Miss Roberts. You adored mine. Julia pulled Margaret into an embrace. The absolute flat erupted, not in applause but in article deeper. Some cried. Some covered their mouths. Some artlessly watched in awe as one of the world's better stars captivated an aged drifter like she was the best important actuality on earth. Jimmy Fallon absolved over slowly. He didn't speak. He artlessly placed his duke on Julia's shoulder, afresh on Margaret's. A bashful acknowledgement, a bashful promise. A fresh Jimmy did article no one expected. He took off his tie, the aforementioned fleet dejected tie he wore on his actual Aboriginal Tonight actualization chance 10 years earlier. The tie his mother had accustomed him. The tie he advised his acceptable luck charm. He bankrupted anxiously and placed it in Margaret's hands. This is for you, Jimmy said quietly. So you bethink this night. So you bethink that you matter, that your chance matters. That advancing actuality tonight took added adventuresomeness than annihilation I've any time done on this stage. Margaret looked at the tie, afresh at Jimmy, afresh at Julia. Three strangers affiliated by article airy, but unbreakable. Lisa, Margaret's daughter, was ball in the bench abutting to her mother. She hadn't accepted this. She had abandoned Capital One acceptable night, one aftermost memory. Instead, she was witnessing a moment that would ascertain the blow of her mother's life. The admirers rose to their feet, not because addition told them to, not because it was expected, but because they accepted they were witnessing article rare, article real. Julia stood up, still captivation Margaret's hand. She angry to the admirers and spoke, her articulation abiding admitting her tears. This woman appropriate here, this woman accomplished me article tonight. She accomplished me that the belief we acquaint aren't aloof entertainment. They're lifelines. They're bridges. They're affidavit to accumulate going. She looked at Margaret. You anticipate I adored you? You adored me. Every letter like yours. Every actuality like you. You're the acumen I get up in the morning. You're the acumen any of this agency anything. Jimmy Fallon stepped forward, adverse the cameras. We're activity to booty a break, he said softly. And aback we appear back, I don't know. I don't apperceive what we're activity to do, because this isn't an actualization anymore. This is aloof life. The flat remained continuing through the bartering break. Nobody sat. Nobody arrested their phones. They artlessly stood, arresting the weight of what they had witnessed. Aback the actualization resumed, Jimmy did an acknowledgement to his desk. He brought two added chairs assimilate the floor. Julia sat in one. Margaret sat in the other. And for the actual 15 account of the broadcast, they artlessly talked. Margaret aggregate her story. Her annulment in 1990, the night she about gave up, the scene that afflicted her mind, the letter she wrote to a drifter who acquainted like a friend, and the analysis 3 months ago that brought her to New York for one aftermost adventure. Julia listened. Jimmy listened. For 100 bodies listened. And aback Margaret finished. Julia fabricated a affiance on a live television. I'm advancing to Portland, she said. I'm advancing to appointment you. Not as Julia Roberts, the actress. As Julia, as your friend. Because that's what we are now. Friends. The actualization concluded abnormally that night. No final monologue. No ball bit. Aloof Jimmy Fallon, Julia Roberts, and Margaret Button sitting calm as the credits formed and the bandage played. Article soft, article gentle. Share and subscribe. Accomplish abiding this chance is never forgotten. In the weeks that followed, the blow went viral. Millions watched Julia Roberts run into the audience. Millions watched Jimmy Fallon accord abroad his advantageous tie. Millions watched an aged woman advise the apple what adventuresomeness absolutely looks like. True to her word, Julia flew to Portland 3 weeks later. She spent an absolute day with Margaret and her family. They watched Pretty Woman together. They laughed. They cried. They fabricated new memories to angle alongside the old ones. Margaret Button anesthetized abroad 4 months afterwards, affably amidst by her family. On her nightstand sat 2 things. The photograph from 1990 and Jimmy Fallon's fleet dejected tie. At her canonizing service, Lisa apprehend a letter her mother had accounting in her final days. Anticipation, I was activity to New York to see a actualization Margaret had written. But I didn't see a show. I saw proof. Affidavit that affection is real. Affidavit that strangers can become family. Affidavit that one smile, one letter, one moment of affiliation can answer beyond 34 years and still beggarly everything. Jimmy Fallon never wore addition advantageous tie. He didn't charge one. He had abstruse that luck isn't article you wear. It's article you give. Julia Roberts still keeps Margaret's photograph in her drawer. Abutting to the letter from 1990. Abutting to the anamnesis of a Thursday night in October aback, she chock full actuality and added and started actuality a friend. And about in Portland, Oregon, a ancestors still tells the chance of the night their mother reminded the apple that every actuality in every audience, no amount how accustomed they seem, carries a chance account endlessly aggregate for. That's what the Tonight actualization became that night. Not a show. A reminder. A admonition that abaft every seat, abaft every screen, abaft every bearding face in the crowd, there's addition cat and mouse to be seen. And sometimes if you're adventurous abundant to run, you ability aloof acquisition them. Jimmy Fallon still talks about that night. In interviews, in quiet moments backstage, in conversations with new guests who sit in the aforementioned armchair Julia Roberts abandoned, he tells them about Margaret. He tells them about the tie. He tells them that the greatest moment of his career had annihilation to do with comedy. I've interviewed presidents, Jimmy already said in a podcast months later. I've interviewed bedrock stars, cine legends, athletes who afflicted history, but the actuality who accomplished me the best about what this job absolutely means. A 78-year-old woman from Portland who aloof capital to beam one added time. The Tonight actualization assembly aggregation created a new attitude afterwards that night. Afore every taping, addition from the agents walks through the admirers and asks a simple question. Is there annihilation you appetite us to apperceive about why your actuality tonight? They don't affiance anything. They don't accomplish guarantees, but they accept because Margaret Button accomplished them that every bench holds a story. Julia Roberts carries article altered now aback, she walks onto allocution actualization stages. A baby bankrupt agenda in her pocket. Margaret's final letter, the one Lisa beatific afterwards her mother passed. Julia has never appear what it says. She abandoned mentioned already that it ends with Bristle's words. Thank you for seeing me. Some nights aback the acclaim dies bottomward, and the cameras stop rolling. Jimmy Fallon sits abandoned in the abandoned studio. He looks at row 3. He remembers the complete of Julia's heels active bottomward those stairs. He remembers the blackout that followed. He remembers acquirements that his job was never about the jokes. It was consistently about the bodies who came to apprehend them. And in that abandoned studio, in that quiet darkness, Jimmy Fallon understands article best entertainers never learn. The spotlight exists not to brighten the stage, but to advise us see who's sitting in the shadows, cat and mouse to be found.